So let's start from chapter number 4, taking appropriate action. So in this chapter, let's have a look the chapter overview. What we have here on the chapter overview, we have few things. We have whistleblowing, and we have taking appropriate action. Now let's talk about the first one, the whistleblowing. Says this is the disclosure by an employee of illegal or unethical practice by his or her employer. So basically, whistleblowing is not allowed. It is not allowed because this one you're giving the hints, or it's kind of like tipping off. So we will see, like if I see the tipping off or something, like when I'm going to blow the whistle. So it is basically like there is some certain situation could raise, and we need to understand where we can do the whistle blowing, we know where we cannot. So in certain situation, we can do disclose the information, we can tell the NCA. In certain situation, we cannot. So you're going to see like all of this in detail. And the next thing we're going to see, taking the appropriate action. From the taking appropriate action, we'll see like some scenario, some scenario based question we'll see, and they will ask as an accountant or as an employee, what is the best action can be done by me. So for example, if I work in a company and if I see something is not right there, or something is seems to me unethical, so what will be the best action from my side? We're going to see that, and we're going to see the ethical conflict. So we can say the conflict of interest. Now conflict of interest, we have seen the last chapter as well, and that chapter we have seen like what does that mean, conflict of interest. So when you have a client from the same industry, for example, and if both client want the same services from you, sometimes it create conflict of interest. So you cannot provide the better services over other client. For example, let's say I have a two client and both client want to have a negotiation to buy a property. Let's say one client said to me, can you make a negotiation for me because I like to buy a house? And I have another client, he like to buy the same house, and he also asked me, can you do the negotiation on behalf of him? Now if I do negotiation for both person, like to whom I should give the better price, it will create a conflict, isn't it? Because I cannot say like, okay, I'll give you X not Y, or I can give it X not to the Y. So why not X? So basically when we work for the client, you have to make sure it doesn't create the conflict of interest, because we can provide the best services for a certain goal only for one client, not for both. So for example, if both client want to negotiation for a same product or for the same services, or to buy a same houses or same properties, same premises, we might not give the same way, because that might create a conflict of interest, and also that will create the issue for the confidentiality. Maybe the confidential information I cannot keep if there is a two client from the same industry. So you have to be very careful, is there any conflict of interest or not? So if there's a conflict of interest raised, we might have to resign from that type of engagement. Or if we have a different partner in the same firm, we might give this work to the different partner, but we need to make sure we can produce enough level of security so that the information cannot pass to one person to another person. Then the next one we're going to see about the money laundering. Now, the money laundering is the way people try to hide the real source of the income. So, for example, if someone have like a sort of cash, and they like to show this money come from the legal source, and they try to follow different type of techniques, so that they can prove to the bank, or they can show to the HMRC or the government regulatory that this money come from the legal source. Normally, like for example, the business based on the cash, they might involve with this sort of thing. For example, if you have a laundry machine business, and this business is heavily based on the cash, because every single laundry machine we have, this operate by the change, the coins. So this, all this pound, the changes we have is all cash. Now at the end of the month, they have a like 20,000 pound cash or 50,000 pound cash. And for example, one let's say someone they have some money from the different source, from the illegal source, and they try to put some cash money and add it with this cash and deposit to the bank, so that bank understand this money come from the business. And at the end, if the money accepted by the bank, then this money will be legalized. So there is a certain way people try to hide the real source of the money, and this comes under the money laundering. Now money laundering is a crime. Money laundering is a definitely is a crime. It is not allowed. If you do money laundering, you might end up within a prison. So we have to see when and what situation give us the indication maybe the money laundering is involved here. For example, if you see like a client is a very close to your accountancy firm, and this client, rather than depositing the money straight away to their bank account, they give the money to the client bank account. So every single accountancy firm, they have a client account. For example, when you will be accountant, you will make the bank account, and in the bank you can create the client account. So rather than the client deposit the money to their bank account, they transfer the money to you to deposit the money on the client account. And after that, maybe after a few months, you transfer the money to the client bank account, so that it look like this money with the adjustment of the tax come from HMRC or something else, and this money looks like come from the legitimate source. So there is certain thing you can always see, and because of that, we can say like obviously the uh, money laundering can be involved. So that's all of this will give us the indication of the money laundering. So obviously if this type of hints we can get from the client, we might think this client is involved with the money laundering. So we're going to see some situation where we can guess maybe this person involved with the money laundering. All right, the next one we're going to see that is called taxation services. Now, as an accountant, we're going to provide the taxation services to the client. Now, it says when a member in practice carries out taxation services, the client remain responsible for the return and the computation. The member act as an agent. Very, very careful. So as a director, for example, if we have a business, we cannot blame the accountant. We cannot say, you are the person to submit, who is responsible to submit my tax return. But obviously, like accountant is only responsible if you give any work to him. But if you don't give any work to the accountant, then the accountant is not responsible for that. Remember that. So this is the responsibility of the principal, of the directors of the company, not the accountant. So even though the accountant provide the accounting and the taxation services and the audit services, but it's all come under as an agent. So they just act as an agent. So if you don't submit your tax return, if you don't submit the company financial statement to HMRC on time, the accountant will not receive the penalty. Ultimately, the company or the director, they receive the penalty, because all this notification, all this reminder, HMRC sent to two people. So HMRC sent the reminder of submit the accounts and the taxation services to both people, to the accountant, the agent, and the director. So but the responsibility belongs to the director to submit the tax return on time, not the accountant. So that's why the accountant always act as an agent. Obviously, as an agent, the accountant will have some responsibility, but the accountant will never be responsible to submit the tax return. At the end, this is the principle. Maybe the directors, or maybe the company owner, if the person, the shareholder, if he run the business by himself, or if he's a sole trader partnership, this type of people will be responsible for that, not the accountant. All right, so we're going to see all of this from this chapter. So let's have a look what we have here. Okay, we'll try to speak a little bit loud if it is help. So let's have a look what we have here. All right, so the first thing we're going to see on the last class we have seen what is the ethical issues. So obviously we have to ask like three questions to ourselves before I can decide I'm acting ethically or not. I have a question from someone. What about as I isn't get service from accountant? So who is going to be responsible? Uh, I didn't get your question. If you cannot be agent, so if you need any service from the accountant, so accountant will be the agent because he will be work on behalf of you. So if you need any services from the accountant, obviously like you cannot be the agent, so you'll be the principal. So the person who need the services, he is the principal, and the person who providing the services, he is the agent. All right, so let's have a look. The first thing we have here is the transparency, effect, and fairness. So transparency is all about, do I mind others knowing that I have decided? So what I have decided, if other people knows it, do I mind for that? Effect, who does my decision affect or hurt? And fairness, would my decision be considered fair by those affected? So three questions I need to ask myself. If these three questions give me the positive answer, give me the green light, so I understand I can go for that. There is nothing I'm doing wrong. Okay, let's have a look. One of the situation we have activity one. Let's try to read and try to understand this question. Financial statement and the performance. At your firm of chartered accountant, you have been asked by the partner to whom you report to sit in and take notes as she interview an applicant for the post of receptionist with the firm. In the course of the interview, your attention is drawn to the following aspects of the discussion. It says the partner having learned that the candidate has three small children. So basically what's happening here, so your partner asks you sit down next to me and write some note because I'm going to take some interview, and make a note for that. All right, so after that what happened, so there is a one person for the interview and the candidate has three small children. Ask a lot of question about her plan to have more children and her childcare arrangement. So the candidate saying obviously they have a plan to have more children, and also like for the childcare arrangement, because some of the company they offer childcare services. For example, if you work for John Lewis, if you work for Google, there is a big company. They always offer like childcare services to the children. So if you have a children, you can put your children on the childcare and they will pay for that. Or sometimes the organization they have inside childcare services. When the candidate in return asks about the firm family friendly working policies, you notice that the partner omit to mention the childcare assistance is available. So basically, when the candidate said, "Is there any? What is the working policy here?" and the partner, she didn't mention anything about the childcare, and the childcare services is available for the employee if someone work for this company. So what do you think? What will be your action here? So in the requirement, we have to say what are the ethical issue raised here, and how will you decide what to do about them? So in this situation, what do you think? What you can do? Because there are childcare facility available for this company, but the partner she didn't say anything about that. Now the question is like there is two way. The first thing maybe the partner she completely forgot. She it's not intentionally. Maybe she forgot to mention that, And the next thing is maybe she don't like to take her as employee because she have a lot of children and she have a plan to have more children. Maybe your partner, she thought maybe she is not the right person, so she will not take, so she, that's why maybe she don't want to tell her. Now the question is like, if the second one is the reason because like she have a children and the partner don't want to take her, so it will be unethical. And if your partner, if the partner forget completely to mention that, this is not unethical because maybe she can tell later on to that employee. So if the partner said intentionally like, oh, I'm not going to tell her because I don't like to take, I don't want to give her a job, so if this is the thing, this is unethical. And obviously like, if the person, if your partner decided not to offer the job anyway to her, then obviously it's not really matter, uh, she mentioned you have the childcare facility or not, because even though the partner said we have a childcare facility, but after that she is not offering the job to her, so it's really not matter. So obviously we have to discuss all of this. All right, what happened next? So you can see on the next para they said the candidate revealed that the family depends mainly on the income from the husband job at local electrical goods manufacturer. Okay. As it happens, this company is one of your clients. So the husband working in a company and the family depend on the husband income. And the company, the husband working, this company is also one of your client. And you are aware of its plan to shut down the local plant over the coming year. So by somehow that company, the husband working, that company will going to be closed next year because he's your client. You already know, but that's very confidential information. Now, what could be unethical, or what will be your action in this point? Now, obviously, like we can see, we cannot basically say something is unethical because the company will run or close. That is decision. This that will be decided by that company. It's nothing we can do here. But obviously we can feel sorry, like the husband will lose the job and the family depends on the husband income, so you can feel sorry. But actually we cannot disclose this information to that lady because this is the confidential information, and we know it because that company is our client. So we cannot override this information and tell to this lady. We cannot tell the candidate. So this information is confidential, and we don't see anything ethical here because this is the economic of life. So business will close down if they cannot survive. The next point we have here, they said the candidate left her previous employer because they continue to employ a successful member of their sales staff who had sexually harassed her and another female employee. This firm is another client of your firm. So basically, the reason this candidate left the previous job because she was sexually harassed by a sales employee, and that person was so successful, the company didn't take any action against him. Now, unfortunately, or for fortunately, this client also this firm also is your client. Now, this is kind of the indirect information. This person left the job from another company and he's your client. It's not really matter for you because he cannot really do anything. Even if she complained like she was harassed, but obviously it's not something you have the information directly from the company because you get the information from this employee. So you cannot take any action based on this information. Obviously, like this is not something relevant to your company directly. So you can say, obviously, you can feel if it is true, that is unethical or that may be not uh, good for that company, but you cannot do anything because this candidate just came for the interview with your company. So obviously, we cannot do much here. There is no unethical threats that you can handle here, and there is not much you can do for this candidate. So obviously, even though this firm is your client, but the information coming directly to you, so there is nothing you can do here. All right, so after the candidate has left, the partner looks across at you, rolls her eyes, and say, "Just lose those notes, will you?" So basically, once the candidate left, the partner looked at you and said, just like throw this notes or lose this note, you don't need it. That means the partners already decided not to take her for the employment. So obviously, as we discussed before as well, so if the partners already decided not to offer the job to that person, obviously it's not really matter if the person don't mention about the childcare, because she is kind of decided not to take her for any reason. So if this is the case, so it will not make any difference for the candidate, even if you mention like there are childcare facility available. So this sort of thing can see in the workplace, we can face this type of situation. So we need to be very clear and careful, like what type of action I can take, what type of action I cannot take. So if there's something I can do, I can do. If there's something I cannot do, I cannot do. So obviously have to consider from both sides. All right, so let's move on to the next situation. What we have, the next situation. So next situation we have here, activity 2. It's a sensitive ethical conflict. You are employed as an accounting technician working in practice. Now you have to be really careful, especially when you do your synoptic exam. So if the question said, if the question said, what is you working in a practice or you working in a company, so you have to be really careful. This one is just a discussion, Hasim, so you don't have to really write any answer for that. So obviously it's just discussion, what you can do, what you cannot do. So in the exam, if this type of question will not come to you, but obviously you can, if this is a situation come to your life or in the exam, you can say like, okay, this sort of thing, so I can say this sort of thing I cannot say. So I just explained to all of you, you can write your own way, but that is not precise answer for this. It is a judgmental thing. You can say this is the thing I should do, this should, this, so this is the thing I cannot do. All right, so the next point we have here, the activity 2. So let's have a look. So as I was saying that, very careful with this word. You are working in a practice. Remember, if the question said you working in a practice, that means you work in accountancy firm. Now if the question mentioned to you, you're working in a practice, and sometimes the question also mentioned you are work as a sole practitioner. So if you work in a practice, you might have few partner, or you maybe work yourself. We don't know it. So the reason it is important, because if you have to report to someone, maybe you have to report to the MLRO. So MLRO means money laundering reporting officer for the money laundering, or maybe nominated officer. So if anything you find unethical, you have to inform. If it's relevant to the money laundering, then you report to MLRO. If it is not relevant to money laundering, if it is any ethical matter, you report to nominated officer internally. But if you work for yourself, let's say you are a sole practitioner and you don't have anyone to report, so you should report that time to NCA. So it's very, very important. This line you have to remember, you working alone in the practice. So question will give you the clue. And based on the question, you have to tell the answer. All right, let's see this question. You have some concern regarding inaccuracy in the amount of time some of your colleagues in practice charge their client, which often result in client paying for an accountant time that has not been spent on the client work. When you report this to the partner, she said, forget it. The client are still getting good value for the money one way or another. Do you think the partner wastes time trying down every hour that goes astray here and there? You owe it too much. So basically, when you will be working for as an accountant, the way we're going to charge to the client, that will be depend how many hours you're going to work for that client. For example, let's say one client approached to you, and the client said, "Can you prepare my accounts and submit to HMRC?" And you said, "Yes, I can." And if the client asks you how much you're going to charge, now how much you're going to charge, it will be depend how much time you need to spend for that client. Now you will ask the client, the first question you're going to ask the client, how much is your revenue? What is your revenue for the last year? And if the client said 1 million, then you try to understand what is the nature of the business. So you ask like what type of business it is. And the client said, my business is, for example, it's a off license shop, or it's a chicken chip shops, it's a retail shop. And you try to understand how much work you need to do, because you have done this work before as well, and you can make some estimate. So based on the structure of the organization, based on the nature of the business, then you said, okay, I think I have to spend 100 hours to prepare the accounts. So 100 hours, this is this, I will charge 40 pound per hour. So I will charge you, for example, 4,000 pound. And the client said, okay, that's fine, there is no problem. And obviously, when you send the invoice to the client, you do the same thing. On the invoice, you write it down 400, 100 hours, 40 per hour. So you done payroll, you done accounts, this. And some accountancy firm, even they give the breakdown. They said like, I've spent 20 hours on the accounts. I spent 20 hours on the payroll. I spent 20 hours on the VAT. They also give the breakdown, but it's not very necessary, because for the client, it's not really matter. So the client will agree how much he will pay, and you can give the breakdown. I work total 100 hours. But as an accountant, you know how much hour you have spent it. But when you charge to the client, you actually charge based on the number of hours you working for that client. So that's the reason you tell your client exactly how much you're going to charge. Now obviously this is estimate, you really cannot say like 100% accurate, but it can be like a little bit up and down. But for example, if you charge for 100 hours and you can see you finish the work only 60 hours, that means you charge a lot. So this has happened here. So you basically charging a lot of money to the client, but actually you never spend that much of time for that client. And when you report this matter to the partner means like who own this practice, who own this accountancy firm. So when you report this, and she said or he said like, don't worry about it, because the client will still getting the good value for the money. So we understand maybe this is the normal trend for this company, and they always do that. So this is kind of the normal trend, to be honest. If you work any of the practice, yeah, this is very maybe not very common, like they'll return the money. So they will call the client and tell like, oh, I have finished your work really quick, so you don't have to pay. Whatever you paid, I'm going to refund. Or I have finished your work really quick, I'll refund you some money. It is not happen always, but this how it's supposed to be. So if you work in a company, if you see they're charging more money, this is your responsibility to report to your supervisor, and obviously they will take the action. So for that, you don't have to report to NCA for that, because it's look like unethical, but it's not a crime. So what will be the question here? So obviously, like consider what ethical conflict are happening here and what step you would be required to take. So obviously the ethical thing we already discussed, that is like they are charging more than they work for that client, and obviously it's a very unethical, it looks like very unethical. And obviously the next unethical thing is you already inform the partner, and the partner said forget it, this is also unethical. So the next step for you, it will be to find a ethical committee. If the organization or if the practice have ethical committee, so ethical committee, you inform this to the ethical committee. And obviously like if you still see there is no ethical committee or they are not doing anything, then you will look for the independent advice. So you cannot just tell to NCA, remember that, unless it is a criminal offense, you just cannot call the NCA, the National Crime Agency, and tell they are doing this. So you have to look for the independent advice. So if anywhere, if you see I'm not very sure what to do, you look for the advice. For example, we have some government body as well who gives some advice. For example, let's say you work in a company, or you work in a farm, or you are owner of the limited company or sole trader. Now if you're stuck somewhere, if you don't know what to do, you can call a company called ACAS. ACAS, I believe the spelling is right. ACAS. So ACAS is the government organization. If you type Google ACAS, you'll see this is the free services. For example, employment law, any regulation. If you're not sure with, if your employer doing something and you feel it's wrong, you can always call them and they'll give you the advice about the employment law. So if you, it's for both, for the employer, for the company, and for the employee as well. So you can take advice from them. So if we see like we inform the partner, we inform the supervisor, it's still nothing happen, we can always look for the advice from the third parties. All right, so let's have a look the next situation what we have next. The next situation we have here, activity 3. In activity 3, you can see we have sensitive ethical conflict. Says Jessica, an AAT member in an accountancy firm, has taken on a new member of staff, Ben. She has noticed that Ben frequently uses the office color printer to print personal items. This is done during the normal office working hour. It's not really matter it is during the office working hour or not, because if the person using the office printer for his personal purpose, it is unethical. So let's have a look. What is the requirement? Answer the following question by selecting the appropriate option. In order to behave in a sensitive manner in this circumstance, what is the most appropriate action for Jessica to take immediately? Action: report Ben to AAT, suspend him without pay until further notice, discuss his behavior with him and encourage him to change it. So obviously, we can see like we don't want to be really rude at the beginning to the employee, or like suspend his salary or dismiss him or give him a notice of like dismissal or give any warning. So first we can discuss, maybe if you discuss with him, maybe he will change his behavior. So we'll say we're going to discuss with him and we say like try to avoid that because it is not ethical, you using the company resources for your personal purpose. So you're going to say we're going to discuss this behavior with him and encourage him to change it. All right, so let's have a look. What is the next option we have? So let's quickly read this one. Whenever conflict of loyalties arises, the legal responsibilities and your professional standard take precedence, although you should use your judgment as to whether they will be seriously compromised enough to take action through any subsequent grievance or ethical procedures. Sometimes inappropriate client behavior is actually the consequence of an accountant not creating sufficient professional distance between themselves and the client. Appropriate behavior is also important outside the workplace. An accountant need to ensure they conduct themselves appropriately in their personal lives as well as professionally. Okay, let's have a look. The activity 4, what we have here. Following a presentation to new staff, a trainee approaches you with a query. I have a friend who is an AAT member and also the health and safety official at his workplace. He was asked to complete the accident book because someone fell and hurt themselves in the warehouse. He was asked to omit the fact that an ambulance was needed and called. He did what he was told, but I think he may have had other option. So obviously, like if you maybe write more or maybe try to avoid it, obviously you might think it is good for the company for any reason, but actually this is against the health and safety regulation. This is against the health and safety regulation. where we have to have a full disclosure. You have to tell everything. You have to say everything on the book where we record everything. So we have to have a accident book, and we have to record everything so that we can see in future what happened and how many accident took place. Because at the year end you can make appraisal of that. You can see how many accident is happened actually for this business, what was the action is taken, and what is the action the company can take to reduce the risks in future. So let's have a look what we have here. This question said requirement complete the following sentence by selecting the appropriate option from the choices. There is a conflict here between, so we have some pick list we can see here. So we have some pick list from here. All we need to do, we need to pick. There is a conflict between dash an accountant or their employer and their profession. It would be against dash not to update the accident book accurately, to leave out detailed ambulance could be an unlawful act. Therefore, every effort should be made to pursue the employer to allow full written dash. If it is not resolved satisfactorily, then dash may be considered and legal advice. Okay, so let's talk about the first one. There is a conflict here between the what? Between consultation, disclosure, duty of care, or duty of loyalty, or environmental regulation, health and safety, representation, and the resignation. We have a few things here. So, as an accountant, we have a duty of what? Duty of loyalty, isn't it? As an accountant, we have a duty of loyalty. So, you're going to say that will be duty of loyalty. There is a conflict here between the duty of loyalty an accountant owe their employer and the profession. It would be against what? It will be against not to update the accident book. It will be against our health and safety regulation, isn't it? It will be against our health and safety regulation. So it will be against our health and safety regulation not to update the accident book accurately and to leave out the detail of the ambulance could be an unlawful act. Okay. Therefore, every effort should be made to persuade the employer to allow full written what. So that's why I say, like, we cannot just avoid it. We need a full disclosure, isn't it? So we need full disclosure. Yes, we need full disclosures. You have to make it very, very clear what happened. So this is all duty of loyalty. And if I don't do it, this goes against the health and safety regulation. And obviously this is we have to make sure we write everything very uh, clearly, and so that we understand everything, so explain everything. So this is the duty of disclosure. If this is not resolved satisfactorily, then what? Then resignation may be considered and legal advice sought. So if they don't do it, maybe I have to resign from here. If they don't do it, maybe I have to resign and I have to look for the legal advice. All right, so that's it. It's not very difficult. Let's move on to the next one. The next situation we have here, ethical option to take. So let's have a look. What is the question here? So we have Barry is a professional accountant who works in a medium sized practice. Two of Barry's clients are both interested in purchasing one particular business. So this will create the conflict of interest, isn't it? So I have a two client and both of them like to buy the same business. And both client have asked Barry to represent them in the negotiation. So both client want Barry will go and negotiate with the client and try to find the best price for them. Now, obviously, I cannot just go for two people. For example, if my two client want to buy the KFC, I cannot just approach from both, because if I get the offer from the KFC, to whom I should report back? So client one or client two? So that will create the conflict of interest, isn't it? On the requirement, it says explain how the fundamental principle can be threatened here. So what do we think? What is the fundamental principle we have here? The first one is the confidentiality, isn't it? If we have the both client, obviously that will might break the confidentiality, and also the objectivity, because this might create the self-interest threat, isn't it? Self-interest threat. Or maybe I will be not very fair, I'll be biased, because maybe I have to give a favor to one client, so I'll not be very fair to both, so I'll be biased. Or maybe I'll think which client will offer me more money, so I'll do the negotiation for them. So I might think about my self interest. So for that reason, obviously, that will create the conflict of interest. So obviously, this type of conflict of interest, I cannot like just take, because I have to give a full disclosure to both client. Let's have a look. Obviously, what action you can take. So it says, describe a possible ethical conflict process that Barry could use to reduce or eliminate any potential threat. Now, obviously, it is like it depends. Like, is there any safeguard you have that will reduce the risk to an acceptable level? Now, if you see there is a no safeguard, for example, you can say the China wall. So China wall means like we will put the barricade between two team. For example, we have a one partner and another partner. So one partner will be dealing with this client, another partner will be dealing with that client, and both partner will not share the information between them. So this is called a China wall, so keep the confidentiality. But before we do that, like, we have to tell the both client that, or we have another client who is also approached for this negotiation. So you have to make sure we inform all of this to the client, so that the client don't feel like we are not honest, we are not transparent. We have to be very clear what's happening, and we have to inform both client we are doing the negotiation for both of you. So one of the partner will be negotiation will do negotiation on behalf of you, and another partner will do for you, so that they understand. They'll know it, and after that they will decide they want to keep you as a negotiator for that company or not. So the next thing we can see, we can look for the advice from the senior partner. So we can say we will speak to senior partner to reduce the risk. All right, then we'll review the company policy and procedure. So review the organization policies and procedure. Yeah, and maybe like if there is no safeguard, we have to resign from one engagement. So we cannot take the another one. So there are a few things we're going to discuss, but this is all the possibility. But if there is a no safeguard is available, we have to resign from one engagement. All right, so let's move on to the next one. The next section we have for the money laundering. So let's have a look at the money laundering. The money laundering, as we discussed before as well, the money laundering is all about like try to hide the real source of the income. In the exam, yes, you will have option to choose, and you have either to pick list. You have to say the true and false, or sometimes you need to write, but that type of writing will be in the form of report or in the form of letter. So they will ask you to write a letter, so you need to response of an email. But you will see this type of question when you will maybe you will do our synoptic. So when you practice the synoptic, you will see exactly what type of question you will be expecting in the exam. All right, so have a look at the money laundering. A key example of this ethics is just a discussion so that you can make yourself clear the ethical situation, but actually you're not going to see this type of question in the exam. But when you actually practice the synoptic paper, you'll see what type of question come in the exam. All right, so a key example of the need to take appropriate action over illegal or unethical activities is the case of money laundering. The key pieces of legislation that form part of the UK anti money laundering legislation are the Proceed of Crime Act 2002, then the Terrorism Act 2000, the Money Laundering, Terrorist Financing and the Transfer of Funds Information of the Payer Regulation 2017. Then we have here money laundering is um, obviously that's the definition. Is the definition is a crime or proceeding when the occur concealing. Obviously, this one is, we can say, very simple way. When I try to hide the real source of the money, we call money laundering. But concealing means hiding. You find you can like try to make it split, and I try to distinguish it in different source. Then you can try to convert it. For example, you have a cash money, you try to buy some different currency, you try to buy some dollar. From the dollar you make it a pound. So there is a lot of way, but the main point here is you're trying to hide the real source of the money and removing the criminal property. For example, you have some property and you try to sell it and maybe try to move the money in different countries. Taking part in arrangement of facilitate the acquisition and removing criminal property, acquiring, user, processing criminal property. So all of this is like kind of the example for the money laundering, but the real definition for the money laundering is like when you try to hide the real source of income, like from where the money coming to you. So for example, if you deposit today £50,000 to the bank, and bank will ask you, where did you get this money from? And you have to have the answer, because if the amount is really big, is this money coming from the business, or you sold any asset? For any reason, you have to tell like where the money is coming from. So if you cannot say where the money coming from, there is a like a smell that is the money laundering is there. All right, let's have a look. One more activity we have for activity 6 is the identification of money laundering. You work in a practice as an accountant clerk. Your firm name is ABC and Co, and a part of your role is to maintain the firm client account, recording payment and to client from and to client. One particular client has been transferring sizable sum of money into the client account at the end of the each month for the last 6 months. What's happening here? One particular client, so one client has been transferring sizable sum of money, so a big lump sum amount of money he is transferring into the client account. Don't be confused, like what does that mean, client and transferring to the client account? What does that mean? That means like every single client is your business. The client is your business because you are the accountancy firm. So if you are the accountancy firm, you have a lot of client means like small businesses, big businesses, they are your client. And when you have a client, you have a client account in your firm. So it's like a bank account, so you create another client account, and the client will have their personal bank account like the business bank account, and you have the account for that client. The reason is like when you're dealing with the client, obviously the client transfer the money, the client don't want to pay the PAYE, the tax, the VAT, the corporation tax, so you maintain another separate account for the client, so both account belongs to that client. So one particular client has been transferring sizable sum of money into the client account. So that means this is accounts belongs to ABC and Co. At the end of the each month for last 6 months. So every month this client transferring some money to the client account. Once the money has been transferred into the client account, a senior partner returns the money to the client using ABC Co check. So basically, he transferring the money to your company, to the accountancy firm client account, and after that, one partner he give the check to that client. So basically, taking the money from him and you give him back. Then okay, the check is signed by the partner and no other signatory is required. So only one partner signed the check and we don't need any other signature. So he only signed. You are aware that the client business is cash based. This is the main thing, when the business is based on cash, when the business is heavily depend on cash, then there is a sort of like you can try to hide. Maybe sometimes you don't try to show the income. For example, let's say you have a 100,000 income, you try to show only 50,000 because it's a cash money, no one knows about it. If the money come to the bank, there is no way we can say this is not our income. But if the money is cash, we can play with that. The last class we have seen on chapter number 3, they said like the plumber came to you and said like, if you pay me cash, you don't have to pay the VAT. So that means if you pay him cash, he's not going to show this one. This one is his income. He's not going to treat this one as business income. So he will keep himself. So that's the reason. Maybe like they said like if you pay cash, you don't have to pay the VAT. And the client and the partner are good friends. There's a familiarity thread here because the partner and the client are good friend, knowing each other for many years. You mention to one of your colleagues that it appears strange for this transaction to take place as there seems to be no valid reason for them to occur. Your colleague replied, "Don't concern yourself. We are not doing anything wrong. If the client is in some sort of dodgy business, then that's his lookout." That's not true, isn't it? If the client is involved with anything dodgy and if we help them, so obviously we'll be the part of that. So it's not like okay the client doing something wrong and obviously like obviously we are not doing it but we are helping to do it, so we'll be part of that. So obviously let's see the requirement. What is the requirement here? It says, is there a money laundering issue raised here? So what do we think based on what we read the scenario? What do you think? Is there anything we have a smell of money laundering from here? And how will you decide what to do about this transaction? So, based on whatever the situation or the scenario we have raised here or read here, we can say there is a possibility of the money laundering, isn't it? There is a possibility of the money laundering. The reason is like, then what's the point the client transferring the money to the ABC company client account, after that you give him back for no reason, and there is no valid reason for that because you're getting the money and after that you're giving back. So what happened, like maybe the person, the client, he tried to show this money uh, uh, from not from the business. They might show like this from the different source, or maybe they have this income, they don't want to show this income. But unless I find the valid reason why you're doing this, I would say maybe this is something like money laundering is involved. So if I don't find the reason why you're doing this, I might think there is a money laundering involved here. Okay, so let's have a look. What is the best option we have here to see? Obviously, like the reason I believe that there is a familiarity trait here because they know each other for a long time, and because of that, they might have a as Osim said, internal committee. Okay, so we can say they can have a internal commitment as well. They might have a internal negotiation. They might do something together. So obviously, the second comment we have like, don't worry, like this is will not something will affect us. This is also not. True, because if the person involved with the criminal offense and if we are helping the client, we will be the part of that, and obviously we can end up with the same punishment the client will get. All right. So obviously, like we try to what will be our action. So our action will be try to find the ethical committee. We try to inform that to our supervisor or like the obviously the manager or the partner who is like superior than that. And obviously, like we're not going to inform the NCA right now immediately, but we have to find the ethical committee. We need to see like what the ethical committee said about it. So if you see this type of situation, remember, don't advise like I'm going to inform the NCA, because NCA, where you are very sure in this scenario, we're just like guessing. There could be a obviously like it's like a guess. It's not something I'm very sure. There may be some other reason as well, but the question doesn't give me the hints like very clearly like this person is doing this and that. So it's just like they said, we are not doing anything dodgy. Maybe dodgy. I can get a smell of that. I can inform my suspicion. So whatever I'm guessing, my what's that called? My concern, I can share with my supervisor. But obviously in this instance, it's a very fast instance, it's very initial stage. I cannot say they are involved 100% with the money laundering and I will inform the NCA if they don't take anything. But right now I cannot say that. I can only say like it seems like they're doing something for no reason. I'm going to inform my supervisor or the ethical committee for the further action. All right, so let's move on to the next section. Let's have a look what is the penalty we have here. Says terrorism is defined in the Terrorism Act 2000 as the use or threat of action designed to influence the government or to intimidate any section of the public, to advance a political, religious, or ideological cause where the action would cause violence, threat, health and safety, or damage to the property, including disruption to the electronic system. There are no diminish or minimum basically exception to either money laundering or terrorist financing offense. This means that all offense, however small, must be reported. The maximum period of imprisonment that can be imposed on a person found guilty of money laundering or terrorist financing is 14 years. An unlimited fine can also be imposed. Money laundering measure, financial institution and non-financial business and the profession are required to adopt a specific measure to help prevent and identify money laundering and terrorist financing, including implement customer due diligence. Obviously due diligence is all about like checking the background of the client. So from where the client coming from, what was his previous business, what he used to do before, his identity with the photos. So this is all this the process of the due diligence check, and keeping this information for 5 years. So if any question raised in future as an accountant, we can give this ID for the 5 years. We can show this information like I have checked the background. So it is not something I can do for that. Then implement internal reporting measures, including an appointment of the money laundering compliance principal and a nominated officer. Avoid doing anything that might obviously this is like kind of tipping off, as we said before as well. We're not going to give any hints to the client like you are doing this, I'm going to inform that. So you're not going to help the client if they do something wrong. So you're not going to do the tipping off to the money launderer. Disclose specific knowledge or suspicions to the appropriate authorities. Obviously if we need to disclose to the appropriate authorities. Proceed of Crime Act 2002. The Proceed of Crime Act 2002 create a single set of money laundering offence applicable through the UK relating to the proceed of all crime, including the principal money laundering offence, offence of failing to report or disclose, or offence of tipping off. So all of these three will be categorized under the Proceed of Crime Act 2002. All right, so let's have a look how to disclose. Or we have who to disclose. We already said that before as well. So let's say how to disclose. If there is an obligation to report a disclosure, the accountant must disclose as follow: type of organization, partnership, group, practice, or company. So Type of report, we have internal report and given to from nominated officer. So obviously, as we said before as well, if we work for a company and if we have a nominated officer, we have to give the internal report first to him. So if I work in a practice like where I have a nominated officer, if I work in a company, if I work in a partnership where there are nominated officer available, I have to tell first to him, or I'm going to give the report to him. Further step, NCA. So for the organization where we have like nominated officer, first we give the internal report to the nominated officer. If nothing happened, if there is nothing action taken by the nominated officer, then we inform to NCA. Then the next one we have here, sole trader. So the sole trader is all about like when you work for yourself. So we have suspicious activity report. This is the SAR. So I'm very like concerned something happening is that. So you make a report for that and you report to NCA. So the sole trader, the reason you report to NCA because you don't have any nominated officer at all. All right, I have a question from Zafrini. I have a similar question. Do we need to remember everything word by word for the exam? Not really, Zeph. Basically, this is like we're trying to understand the ethics, try to understand what could be our situation. But the exam question is completely different. The exam question will be very straightforward, very precise, what to do, what not to do. Pick the checklist, pick the true and false, and write a report. It's not going to be something, but it will help us to understand the whole ethics process and the procedures. And if the question come based on any scenario, we will be in a position so that we'll be able to write something. It's very important to understand the whole thing. That's why reading the whole book. But actually, we really don't need to, because in the exam, it's not going to be like they'll ask you a lot of story. No, it's not like that. They will tell you a very precise question. But if you don't know everything, then we might not be, you will be confused like what to write. And that's the reason we try to understand as detailed as possible. All right, so let's have a look what else we have here. Says information to include in the disclosure. So on what type of information you're going to include in the disclosure: identity of suspect, information on which the knowledge or suspicion is based, location of laundered property if known. So when you're going to report to someone, obviously you need to tell the identity of the suspect, like that person, detail information on which the knowledge or suspicious is based. So you explain everything, like why you think that and what's happening and the location of the property. All right, so we have a two more thing here that is also important to know. That is type of disclosure. We have a protected disclosure, we have authorized disclosure. So let's find the difference between these two. What is the protected disclosure and what is the authorized disclosure? So let's talk about the protected disclosure first. This is made by someone who knows or suspect another person of money laundering. For example, an accountant who suspect their client of money laundering. The accountant will be protect against allegation of breach of confidentiality. So obviously, we're talking about from the accountant point of view. So this is made for someone who knows or the suspect another person of money laundering. For example, an accountant who suspect their client of money laundering. So for example, if I believe, I'm very sure my client is involved with the money laundering, so this is like I'm going to disclose. If I disclose that, that will be the protected disclosure. The accountant will be protected against the allegation of breach of confidentiality. So if I disclose this information to the NCA, in future they cannot say like, oh, why did you disclose the confidential information, because this is very confidential between you and the client. So how come you tell this one to the third parties? The reason I'm saying this one, because this is the public interest, and obviously if I disclose this information, I will not be like breach of any confidentiality, so I'll be protected. So this is protected disclosure. On the other hand, we have a authorized disclosure. This is made by any person who realize that they may have engaged in or be about to engage in money laundering. For example, a bank that is asked to transfer money, they realize that it represent proceed of crime. So for example, if a person try to transfer a lot of money to one country to another country, and the bank realize that maybe this person is involved with the money laundering. So obviously if this has happened, then they can disclose this information, and they are authorized. So someone likes already have the authorization from the before. For example, HMRC, for example, banks, for example, there are few organizations, they already have the authority to disclose the personal information in certain cage. So when you basically sign the contract, when you try to open a bank account, when you accept the terms and condition, they say like, if we feel you involved with this, we have a right to disclose this information to these people. So they have this authority already in default, so they don't have to ask you, or they don't have to think anything, so they can always disclose this information. This is the difference between the protected disclosure and the authorized disclosure. All right, so what they said here, any person can make an authorized or protected disclosure. However, protected disclosure are compulsory in regulated sector. All right, let's have a look one more activity, then we'll take a break. So let's have a look activity 7. So report to whom. You work in a large accounting practice, and your manager has requested you to set up a direct debit payment £1,000 per month in respect of the petty cash, obviously the miscellaneous expense. This type of instruction has not occurred previously, and you are surprised to learn that the payment is being made to what appear to the bank account belonging to your manager's wife. Obviously, obviously, uh, this is something fishy, isn't it? Like there is a miscellaneous expense, that is petty cash expense, and they said like set up a direct debit, and the money will be paid to the manager's wife. Now it is obviously like kind of if the manager's wife like spent, if the manager buy a lot of thing for the office, for example they buy stationery by using their personal account, if they buy tea and coffee, paid for the taxi, for the small expenses, they can reimburse the expense from the accountant. So they can always say, okay, I'm going to give this receipt to the accounts office, and I'm going to take that money from them. But it looks like a little bit different, because you set up a direct debit and you're trying to basically pay to the manager's wife. So what is the requirement here? If you begin to suspect that your manager is using his position in your organization to launder money, who should you report this to? So remember that this is your manager. He's not the owner, he's not the director, isn't it? He just work as a manager. So if he trying to use his position, if you're trying to use his position, because if you tell the director, if you tell the nominated officer, they will take the action immediately, isn't it? They will not be very happy, like why the manager is doing this. So it's not like you have to tell the NCA, because it's something like within the company, one employee, manager is employee, isn't it? So one employee use his position, so obviously like this is not something the directors and the nominated officer are going to like. So first you will do, you inform your nominated officer. So your firm nominated officer, providing they are not your manager. So obviously if the manager is the nominated officer, so there is no point of informing that. In that case, maybe you will be able to inform the NCA. But there is a different, obviously they said the manager is not your nominated officer. But if you see the manager is doing this, and also the manager is the nominated officer, so there is no point to saying this thing to him. But here it is not, so I'm going to inform the nominated officer, because he might take immediate action for that. All right, so any question from here before we take a break? And after that, we'll start from the next activity, activity 8. All right, so let's start with our the next activity, that is activity 8. So let's have a look that one. Okay, so says report to whom. So we have a two reporting option. Either we report to the nominated officer or we report to NCA. Let's read this one. Says you are authorized by the AAT to provide bookkeeping service to the public. You operate as a sole trader specializing in giving a quality service to small businesses. One of your client make a small living selling brick a brag but has just started to also sell second-hand high-end laptops. As part of the record keeping you maintain for clients, you always take a note of any serial number or other unique number to identify their inventory. While reading a local newspaper, you are concerned to see an article listing a number of serial number that relates to stolen laptops. The serial number are identical to the laptop details that your brick a brac client has been handling. So you might think like this client involved with this something stealing a laptop. So the laptop has been stolen, and maybe they sell it here, or they may be involved with some criminal offense. All right. So the requirement here is if you are a sole trader and begin to suspect that one of your clients is laundering money, who should you report this to? So you are a sole trader and you should report to someone about it. So who is the right person for us to report? But we know like we are a sole trader, and obviously like we cannot we don't have any nominated officer. So obviously we need to report to whom? We need to report to NCA, isn't it? That's very simple one. So let's have a look the next one. So for this one, you're going to report to NCA, the National Crime Agency. If you're a sole trader, you report to NCA because you don't have any nominated officer. All right, the tipping off. The tipping off is like we already know the definition of the tipping off. Tipping off is like if you're helping your client to understand, you inform the authority. For example, if you say someone is stealing the car and you call the police, and by the same time you also inform this person, you call the police so that the person can leave the place or person can save himself. So tipping off means you're giving the indication to the client that he is involved with any type of sort of money laundering, but by the same time you also let him know like you inform the appropriate authority. So if this has happened, this person will be already aware of like you done something that will put him in trouble, so he will take action. So if we do the tipping off is not allowed, so you can have a 5 years imprisonment or an unlimited fine. So tipping off is strictly prohibited. It's not allowed in any professional profession, or especially for the accountant. All right, let's have a look. Activity 9. What we have here for the money laundering. We have a true or false question. Indicate whether each of the following statement is true or false by selecting the appropriate option. If a sole trader suspect money laundering, they must disclose this to their nominated officer. Is it true or false? So if a sole trader suspect for the money laundering, we're going to inform the nominated officer. But when we are a sole trader, we don't have any nominated officer, isn't it? If we are a sole trader, we don't have any nominated officer at all. So that falls. The next one we have conviction of a money laundering regulation offense will give an AT member a criminal record. So, as an accountant, if we are involved with the money laundering or if we help the client with the money laundering, that will give us the criminal record. That is definitely true. That is definitely true. The next one we have here, telling a client that they have been subject of a notification to NCA could amount to criminal offense of tipping off. Is it true or false? That's also true, isn't it? So that's very simple. It's not very difficult. Let's move to the next one. What else we have? The next question we have for the appropriate action. Let's have a look this one. You have you have recently visited your client cafe business and you have noticed that they had employee and additional chef. But now, checking the payroll report, you cannot find any mention of this person, any payments made to her, or any other supporting documents. So basically, you visited the cafe and you have found there is a chef there. But when you check the payroll record as an accountant, you don't see this person name is there. So if you don't see this person name is there, that means this person not in the payroll, but this person is working as a chef for this restaurant. The requirement, what would be the appropriate action to take in this circumstance? So what you will do if you find a person. So first you need to discuss what you can see here. So obviously that's your suspicious, like this person may be paid in cash, so he's not showing his income on the payroll. So if the person working for your client and this person uh, does not on the payroll, that means he's not paying any tax, he's not paying national insurance or any statutory obligation for the employment. So if he don't pay it, he is avoiding the tax, he is avoiding any sort of regulation requirement. So this is kind of the, what's that called, this is kind of comes under the money laundering. So this is, if he try to hide the income, that will be treated as a money laundering. So obviously, as we said, this is just a suspicion, it's just a doubt or sim, we are not very sure, this is that, it's just a doubt. So if there is a doubt, we have to report obviously to our nominated officer, and obviously that will be the protected report. If I inform to the nominated officer, that will be the protected report, because I'm not going to be like a breach of the confidentiality because of that. And anything the client do, I'm not very sure. As you said, it could be trainee, it could be volunteer, but if it is, maybe the client will tell you, I have a new employee and he is a volunteer. But if you see as a chef and if they don't mention his name, so you understand maybe he's working and getting paid cash. So if this is the situation, you might think he's involved with the money laundering, because this person not paying the tax or anything, and this is like part of the money laundering. Now you cannot tell your client about it directly. If you tell about your client, I saw an employee on your company and he is basically not on the payroll, so this is, that will be treated as a tipping off, isn't it? If you do that, if you let your client know like about that person, he's not on the payroll, so that will be treated as a tipping off, and tipping off is the offense, so you cannot do it. So you have to prepare the internal report and you have to submit to the nominated officer. All right, so you're going to discuss all of this for that. All right, so let's move on to the next one. The next question we have for the taxation services. Let's have a look what we have here. Taxation is a complex area. The AAT code does not deal with detailed ethical issue relating to the taxation. However, it does provide general principles. The code says that a member providing professional tax services has a duty to put forward the best position in favor of a client or an employer. At the same time, integrity and objectivity must not be impaired, and the service must be consistent with the law. When a member in practice submits a tax return on behalf of a client, it is normally assumed that the member in practice is acting as an agent of the client. Therefore, responsibility of the member should be made clear in a letter of the engagement. So basically, we called it engagement letter. Engagement letter is the letter when a client approached to us and the client said, I need this service. And I said, okay, I'm going to provide this service. That will be the fees and everything. So you write it down in a paper and both parties signed. So we engage as an accountant with the client, and this is called engagement letter. All right. So basically, it will be when carry out service in relation to the taxation, it is essential that it is explained that the client, the principal, remain responsible for the return on computation. This is always so. That's the reason when you prepare any tax return, when you prepare the accounts for the company and submit to HMRC as an accountant, we always write in the top of the accounts based on the client information, based on the client information, so that in future as an accountant we will be never responsible for that. So in future, if the client give me the wrong sales figure, wrong expense figure, anything he give me wrong, I will not be responsible for that. Remember that it's not my responsibility as an accountant to check the client business. I'm not the person as an accountant to go to the client business and check. If the client said, I have a 10 motor vehicle, I have a 10 shops, I have a 10 premises, I'll write it down on the accounts. For me, it is not a problem. And I will be never responsible for that. As I said, we're going to write in the accounts based on the client information. HMRC or government cannot ask me why you said 10 vehicle, but I never found the 10 vehicle. So it's not my responsibility. It's the responsibility for the principal. They have to give me the true information, because before I submit the accounts to HMRC, the director of the company, they sign the report. It's not me. They sign the report and confirm all this information on the draft financial accountant are true and fair. So it's not me who decide that. So they signed, and in future anything happen, they will be responsible for that. As an accountant, we are very secure if we don't involve with anything by knowing. So it's not something we need to worry about. Is the client thing, we don't have to worry what client do. Like if the client tell me wrong information, he will be responsible for that, unless the account is audited. So if the law required the accounts has to be audited, for example, if the company have a turnover or the sales more than 10.2 million, then we have to have audited account. So audit means I have to check every single thing. So if the client said I have a pen, I have to see the pen before I write it down on the accounts. The client have a pen. So this is called audited account. Audited account means I check every single thing and after that I give the report. But if it is not audited account, we don't have to check. Whatever client said, based on the client information, we prepare the accounts. All right, so let's have a look what we have. Report to the relevant authority. We have after a reasonable time period, member in practice and member in the business. Report the situation to the money laundering reporting officer available, or report directly to the NCA member in a business. If they have acted in relation to the error of omission, they must disclose this to the appropriate authority as soon as possible. The member must not disclose this to the client or anyone else, as this may prejudice an investigation. If they have not acted in relation to the error of omission, they may report it to the appropriate authority. This will not amount to a breach of confidentiality. All right, we already know that. Let's have a look one of the activity 11. In the synoptic exam, the question more likely look like that. So this type of question come in the synoptic. You have to pick, you have to choose, or you have to fill in the gap. So let's have a look this one. James, a member in practice in a large firm of an accountant, submit a tax return on behalf of Brian Limited. Requirement: complete the following sentence by selecting the appropriate option. In this situation, James is acting as, so Brian is my client, isn't it? So James, I'm the accountant. So obviously, if I work for Brian, I'm acting as an agent, isn't it? So if I'm the accountant, obviously, like if I work for the client, I always treat myself as an agent. So if you are the agent, obviously, I'll tell you how it work in real life. So if you like to be an agent for any of the client, so how does it work? If the client come to you and said, "Can you do my work?" You said, "I can." So basically, every single limited company they have a company number. So every limited company they have a company number. So all you need to do if you like to be an agent for a new company, so first you have to have a agent ID. So for example, if you like to be an accountant, remember you really don't have to be qualified to be an accountant. All you need the practicing certificate. If you have few experience, 2 years working in a practice, some AAT have a different requirement, ACC have a different requirement. So if you have a practicing certificate, or even if you don't work anywhere, still there is something called CPA, Certified Public Accountant. You can get the certificate from there based on the level of experience you have. Then after that, you apply to HMRC to be an agent. So you apply online. I like to register myself as an agent. So you write all the details and company name, everything, and they will send you an ID. So it's like a government gateway ID with the password. And after that, you will be able to access to the HMRC service anytime. So there will be a separate login for you as an agent, and you can see all the company you have. So the company you work for. So what you do once the client come to you, you take their company number and you log into your account and you apply for the authorization code. So you said this company number 1234, I like to be a agent for that. So if you search the company name will come, address will come, and you submit for the authentication code. Now the authentication code will go to the client address, and the client have to give it to you. So until you have the authentication code, it's like a password, you cannot be agent for that client. So once the client receive the authentication code and he will give it to you, you enter this authentication code and it will be active, and from that time you will be able to see every single thing the client have, the accounts, the record, everything, and you'll be able to submit the accounts for that. So in real life, basically, you work as an agent, and obviously, like when you stop providing the services for your client, then what you do, you just remove you from the agent. So HMRC knows from now you are not providing any services for this client. So the first one you're going to say, "Hey, James is acting as an agent of Brian Limited," and Brian Limited is the principal. So the client we call the principal. All right. The next one we have here, it says, "Complete the following sentence by selecting the appropriate option." So 6 months later, James becomes aware that there is a known error in Brian tax return. He advises his client to disclose this to HMRC. However, having given the directors at Brian Limited responsible time to time to do this, they still refuse to make the disclosure. As an accountant, you always tell the director if there is a mistake or error on the previous period, they have to tell the HMRC. Remember that once you submit the accounts to HMRC, and from that time you have a certain time, for example, 9 months. If you like to resubmit the same account, you have a certain amount of time, and after that you will not be able to resubmit it. And after 1 year, if you found like there was some mistake on the previous year accounts, you have to call the HMRC and you have to sort it out by yourself. And this is not the responsibility of the accountant, it is the responsibility of the directors. But if the director said, "Can you help?" maybe you can help, but it's not their responsibility straight away. All right. So James is obliged to report the client refusal and the fact surrounding it too. So obviously, like I already inform the directors to inform HMRC, but they are said they will not do that. So what will be my action? I need to inform the MLRO. Remember that one thing is very important. Remember that if I found my even if I found my clients are not paying the right amount of tax, my client are evasion the tax. My client are involving with sort of different thing that is not right. I'm not going to tell the HMRC. Remember that. Never ever I'm going to tell any information to HMRC. I have a two place to tell, either the nominated officer or the NCA. HMRC have no relationship with that. Remember that. So we never ever inform HMRC. For example, if I tell the client sort it out, and the clients don't listen to me, and after that, still, I'm not going to tell HMRC. I'm going to say, sorry, I'm going to resign. I cannot be your agent anymore because you're not listening. You're doing something bad. So I cannot be your agent. So I'll tell HMRC from tomorrow, I'll not acting as an agent for this client. But remember, never ever tell the reason to HMRC why you are resigning. If you tell the reason, like, oh, this person is involved with this thing and that's why I'm resigning, you will be in trouble. As an accountant, we never tell the HMRC why we are resigning. We just tell we are resigning. We are not acting anymore as an agent for that client. All right. So let's move on to the next one.